Today, I'll talk to you about communal land in Mapuche communities to incentivize sustainable natural resource management in the Araucanía region. The Mapuche people is the most numerous indigenous group currently inhabiting Chile and Argentina, with most of their ancestral land being located in the Araucanía region in southern Chile. In the 21st century, where some Western ideas of development begin to be questioned due to their negative impact on the environment, indigenous people's roles start to gain relevance due to their potentially more friendly and sustainable relationship with the environment. Within this context, my project generated content to contribute to the discussion and inform policymakers of Mapuche people's ability to manage natural resources sustainably. The Mapuche people have been subject to genocide in the hands of the Spanish Empire, land dispossession by the Chilean army at the end of the 19th century, and more recently, the policies promoted under the dictatorship of Augusto Pinochet have ended up disintegrating the Mapuche's worldview and culture in exchange of economic growth and the forestry industry expansion. Among the policies led by the dictatorship, there were subsidized afforestation costs on new exotic plantations such as pine and eucalyptus, and a decree called Division and Liquidation of the Indigenous Community. Furthermore, the forestry industry, despite creating an economic boost for local communities, generates few employment opportunities, with the Araucanía region being the poorest one in Chile. From an environmental standpoint, exotic plantations of pine and eucalyptus having a direct cause of biodiversity loss, decreases in annual water runoff, responsible for massive wildfires in southern Chile, and promoting soil erosion instead of preventing it. On the other side, Mapuche society was egalitarian, with its members living in a balance between nature and the environment. Within this context, I try to quantify this balance with environment Mapuche people live, with the hypothesis of my research being that Mapuche farm producers achieve more sustainable natural resource management and generate more employment opportunities than non-indigenous producers under changes in the farm's area. And if Mapuche farm producers organized under communal farming would ensure more sustainable practices, with the communal argument made on the basis of increasing the size of the farm. The analysis was conducted using data from the latest Chilean agricultural, livestock, and forestry census. And I developed two regression models. The first one to test how the area of native forest changes under increases in Mapuche producers' farm area. Similarly, other variables were tested as dependent variables, such as exotic plantations forest area of pines and eucalyptus, crop area, forage area, grassland area, fallow area, and sterile area. Among the independent variables, an interaction term in the equation between ethnicity of the producer and farm size will show how changes in Mapuche's farm area change the aforementioned land use dependent variables area. Other demographic variables were included to increase the strength of the model, such as education level, gender, and age. The second model tested how the number of people who works at the farms changes under increases in Mapuche producers' native forest area. Similarly, other variables were tested as independent variables in interaction with the ethnicity of the producer to determine how changes in the area by land use change the number of people employed in the farm. The main limitation of the study is that despite showing a relation or correlation, they do not imply a causal effect. Results show that the model with native forests as a dependent variable has the highest coefficient of determination among all the land use variables tested as dependent variables, with 31.3% of the variance in the total native forest area being explained by the model. And for every hectare increase in the total farm area held by a Mapuche producer, a 0.13 hectare increase in total native forest area is predicted, all other things constant, being this coefficient the highest one from the interaction term of all the models tested. Also, with lower coefficients of determination, results of an increase in fallow area and a decrease in sterile area when the farm size of Mapuche producers increases, all other things constant, was found. Correspondingly, native forest among all the other land use variables was the only coefficient in interaction with the producer ethnicity statistically significant of an increase in the number of people employed on the farm, all other things constant. Despite the study's limitation, the research done is a first step to more advanced techniques to test the Mapuche people conservationist role of conserving and planting new native forest area. In this way, in conjunction with additional research, the possibility of compensation or incentives should be evaluated. Additionally, results show that it's necessary to increase Mapuche producers' farm size to achieve biodiversity conservation. As results show evidence of the Mapuche population as a whole, there are incentives to increase Mapuche people's land collectively to increase environmental protection. But to achieve its full conservationist potential, a new legal framework must be put in place for land owned collectively. First, the state must protect, recognize, and guarantee collective property and create an indigenous territory being declared indivisible and irreversible. Second, an indigenous territory should return the autonomy to the Mapuche people inside their territory, where communities constitute the most local level of government to ensure biodiversity conservation. Third, as some academics propose, the poor, especially in market economies, need the strength that collectives offer to create more economic, political, and social space for themselves. Nevertheless, there are broad conditions that need to be satisfied for successful cooperation to occur, which, based on the Mapuche people customary law that incorporates the notion of individual freedom constrained by the collective, could satisfy these conditions for successful collective action. Finally, the Chilean government has a historical debt with the Mapuche people, which should be paid based on the dispossession of their ancestral land. Nevertheless, to gain new adherence to the Mapuche cause, the Mapuche people's alignment with environmentalism should be potentiated to have greater participation in the elaboration of public policies. The ancestral knowledge of the indigenous people in Latin America, which has never had neither voice nor vote in Chile, will take a leading role when policymakers become aware of the harmony with nature in which indigenous people used to live. Thank you very much, and especially to my advisor, Alain de Jambry. He was very helpful during my research. And I'm open to your questions now.
Okay. Enzo, thank you very much. Another great presentation. I'm sure questions will come up, but one I had of the independent variables, certainly where I've spent a good deal of time in West Africa, it really is, in addition to different ethnic groups, so it is also particularly the gender side of land management that makes a big difference as far as conservation of biodiversity. Did the gender variable come out as being significant?
No, not really. It didn't come out as being significant. What was significant was like the education level more than gender, but it was biased also to more education was leading to more like unsustainable practices, such as like planting new exotic plantations. So something that
negative relationship.
Yeah. Sorry, like no, like more education, more exotic new plantation, like such as pine or eucalyptus instead of native forest. So what I mentioned in my research is that also a new type of education that involves the Mapuche people's culture and worldview into like higher education should be evaluated to also potentiate that more education not only increase forest plantations of pine and eucalyptus, but also native forest area and decreases sterile land, and also other ancestral techniques of the Mapuche people, such as like fallow area, which means like rotating crops.
Mm-hmm. And in the traditional forest practices, are the practices used for economic gain or subsistence? I mean, are there forest, non-forest, timber, non-timber products that are marketed? Is it more for subsistence? How does the forest fit into the local economy and livelihood?
Like the main economic like opportunities from native forests arise from firewood and non-timber forest products, and more recently from tourism. Still, like the forestry industry, either of native forest or pine or eucalyptus, it kind of works as a monopsony. So it's very hard for people with less land to access the forestry industry, and they end up just selling like non-forest timber products. And also this has like the forestry industry has made that tons of the people of the community migrate to the cities, but they still have like this attachment to the community. So like nowadays, even though like the ancestral land of the Mapuche people is in the Araucanía region, the metropolitan region, which is where the capital is located, have a bigger percentage of Mapuche people than the southern regions, and just because of migration, because like lack of employment opportunities.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, listen, please, other people join in, because I could ask Enzo. This is a topic of great interest to me personally. I guess one of them is that, again, and I've seen this elsewhere in forest products, of trying to reinstitute that kind of traditional governance of land after it's kind of, to kind of bring it back can be very problematic and sometimes creates a lot of difficulty. Particularly when the younger people have gone, have left, the demographics change and whatever. To say the governance should become more communal, whatever, sounds good, but how does that happen? I mean, is that possible, and what are the obstacles?
That's a great question. Yes, well, what I tried to follow here was what has done in other countries, especially like in 2009, Bolivia changed its constitution, and it was like the creation of a plurinational state that would allow like different types of governance. But answering your question, yeah, it might be pretty tricky, but. Sorry, can you? I just forget what. Can you repeat me your question, George? It was just like.
Yeah. To reinstitute a more communal governance sounds like it makes sense, but for people who have perhaps they've become laborers on other forests. I mean, they have not practiced that for maybe a generation, or
Gotcha.
Is it reasonable? To do that, to bring it back.
Yeah. Well, first, I guess like even though I propose like a bottom-up approach, like first a top level and changing the legislation must be achieved. Like nowadays, like in the constitutional discussion that's going on in Chile, where like elections are like in 2 or 3 more weeks to elect like the people that will be part of this new constitutional assembly. From the 155 seats, like 17 seats are reserved to indigenous communities. So I would say that even though I propose like a community approach, like a change in legislation from above should like allow this. And it has had like some, like recently, like some Mapuche communities have taken like previous ancestral land like without the legislation, like passing the legislation, and that has triggered some conflict between like big farm owners and Mapuche communities. Even though like now I'm going to answer your question, like some studies show like that the Mapuche communities, like they work like as a base of operations, and even though like people migrate or they have to access like the labor market, they are still like connected in the community. And even like in the cities, like new forms of community organization has like arisen, such as like Mapuche cultural centers that are located like in the biggest cities, like outside rural areas. So even though like the communities have like disintegrated a little bit, even in urban areas or in other contexts, like they remain kind of gathered.
Yeah, no, that's again seems critical. To rebuild is difficult, but to rebuild from a core that is still very strong, and I've seen that elsewhere as well. So very good. Well, listen, thank you.